Welcome back to Iraqi Dinar Alert today. We re-dive in deep into a critical question. Iraq versus the IMF. How does international pressure really shape the dinar? The Iraqi dinar has been a hot topic for years. Iraq has immense natural resources, a young population, and huge economic potential, yet its currency remains weak and tightly managed. A major reason for this is the influence of outside institutions, especially the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. So, how much control does the IMF actually have over Iraq's economy and its currency? And does IMF pressure stop the dinar from rising or revaluing? Let's break down this complex relationship. Iraq's connection with the IMF isn't new. After the 2003 war, Iraq needed global support to rebuild its entire economic system. Since then, it has repeatedly turned to the IMF for emergency loans, budget support, technical guidance, and help with banking reforms. But here's the catch. Whenever the IMF provides financial help, it demands economic reforms in return. These reforms directly impact the dinar's value, how it's managed, and the country's overall financial policies. So, why is the IMF so important to Iraq? Well, even though Iraq is rich in resources, its economic structure is fragile. It's heavily dependent on oil, imports most of its consumer goods, and has a massive public sector. The IMF steps in to provide financial advice, support the annual budget, ensure Iraq meets global banking standards, and guide monetary policy. Because Iraq's financial system is still developing, it often relies on the IMF's framework to maintain stability. Simply put, if Iraq wants international credibility, it has to play by IMF rules. Now, what is the IMF's main goal for Iraq? It's all about stability, not speculation, not sudden reevaluations, not high-risk currency gambles. The IMF encourages Iraq to maintain a stable, predictable exchange rate, avoid any sudden appreciation of the dinar, keep strict control over the dollar supply, and reduce black market activity. From the IMF's perspective, a dramatic revaluation, or RV, would cause chaos. It could lead to market shocks, price instability, and throw the national budget into disarray. That's why the IMF strongly supports Iraq's current managed exchange rate system, which keeps the dinar stable, even if it's weak. One of the biggest points of tension between Iraq and the IMF has been the dollar auction system. For years, Iraq sold US dollars daily to stabilize the dinar, but the IMF saw major problems with this. They believed too many dollars were leaving the country illegally. Some banks were using the auctions for money laundering, and the black market was becoming too powerful. As a result, the IMF pressured Iraq to tighten its anti-money laundering rules, block non-compliant banks, and track every single dollar going abroad. These new rules have significantly restricted currency flow, which in turn affects the dinar's value and stability. The IMF's philosophy is all about gradual reform, not a sudden RV. They have repeatedly told Iraq to make slow, steady changes. The IMF wants to see Iraq fix corruption, strengthen its banks, digitize its payment systems, and diversify its economy away from oil. Only after Iraq completes these fundamental reforms would a stronger currency be realistic. But since Iraq is still in the early stages of this journey, the IMF will not support any major increase in the dinar's value until the economic foundation is solid. This influence extends to Iraq's annual budgets. Since Iraq depends on international support, the IMF reviews and guides many budget decisions. It pressures Iraq to reduce unnecessary government spending, control the public sector wage bill, limit borrowing, and keep its oil price predictions realistic. When budgets are too optimistic or unstable, the IMF demands changes, and these adjustments often help keep the dinar at a conservative, stable value. Even Iraq's central bank, the CBI, is not immune to this pressure. While officially independent, IMF guidelines strongly shape its decisions. The IMF pushes the CBI to maintain a controlled currency rate, strengthen its foreign reserves, and implement global banking standards. Whenever Iraq considers a major monetary change, the IMF is usually there to review it. This oversight prevents risky moves, including a rapid revaluation. It might seem strange, but the IMF often prefers a weak, stable dinar for developing economies. A weaker currency can actually help. It makes Iraq's exports more competitive, keeps oil contracts priced favorably, reduces pressure from government salaries, and helps avoid inflation spikes. The IMF values stability far more than strength. A sudden jump in the dinar's value could hurt Iraq's oil revenue, increase government costs, and shock the entire banking system. From the IMF's point of view, a weak but stable dinar is simply the safer option for now. Another major focus for the IMF in Iraq is corruption. Billions of dollars have been lost through fake invoices, smuggled cash, and non-compliant banks. The IMF has introduced strict conditions to fight this, forcing Iraq to shut down dozens of private banks, freeze suspicious accounts, and strengthen its anti-money laundering laws. Until corruption is brought under control, the IMF will not support any major changes to the currency. So, is it Iraq versus the IMF, or are they working together? It's more like a partnership with both shared goals and conflicting interests. Both sides agree that Iraq needs stability, corruption must be fought, and the banking system needs to be modernized. But they often disagree on the pace of reforms, the level of dollar dependency, and the timing of any exchange rate adjustments. Iraq sometimes wants the freedom to make quick changes, while the IMF insists on slow, controlled progress. So, could the IMF ever support a dinar revaluation? Yes, but only after major reforms are completed. The IMF would need to see a diversified economy, a strong private sector, modern banks with low corruption and stable inflation. Only then would they support a stronger dinar, and even then it would likely be a gradual process, not a dramatic overnight event. In conclusion, the Iraqi dinar's value isn't decided by Iraq alone. It is heavily shaped by international institutions, especially the IMF. The IMF's primary goal is stability, not speculation. That's why it pressures Iraq to maintain a controlled exchange rate, fight corruption, and modernize its economy. Until Iraq meets these conditions, the IMF will continue to play a major role in limiting the future of the dinar. While Iraq's long-term potential is enormous, international pressure ensures that any change in the IQD's value will be slow, measured, and based on real economic progress. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more updates on the Iraqi dinar. See you next time.